guys, welcome back to the channel. If you have not yet hit the subscribe button, make sure to do that because I'm going to be focused on publishing about 100 or more videos this year, and I plan to keep a very consistent content base going, so hit subscribe to make sure to get updates on my newest videos as they get published. Today we're going into some more true paranormal stories. One night I was driving home from bartending at 3 a.m. It was mostly a rural drive through a forest-lined, 2-lane state route. No street lights, almost no other cars. As I came to a hill crest, I saw what looked like a man standing at the bottom of the side of the road. I couldn't make out any features or clothing, but I could just see this dark mass moving. I immediately got chills and felt uneasy. When I got to the bottom of the hill, he started to walk out on the road. I remember thinking, holy shit, this man's trying to off himself, and flashing my brights. As I pulled into the other lane to avoid him, he completely disappeared. I called 911 thinking someone could need help, but when I followed up, no one was found in the area. This all happened within a matter of seconds. It was the summertime in the late 70s in a small neighborhood in Texas. We had nothing to do but eat old food, talk, and play this YMCA Village People record. We were at my friend's house, and we'd just been eating some government peanut butter, and I remember how odd it tasted with its little pool of oil down in the pit of the butter. We started talking about his haunted house. At that moment, all the sounds of the street, the AC and plumbing combined in clarity, and I suddenly became aware of every subtle little thing. The house felt different and uncomfortable. We both looked at the little rocking chair in his room, and I remember thinking the very words he quietly spoke. Why is the rocker moving sideways? We ran out of that house as fast as possible. Before I start this story, I'd just like to let you all know that I'm predominantly a skeptic, or at least I was until this house. I actually rarely talk about the events that happen in there because I don't have any rational explanation. But that house has stuck with me well into adulthood. Back in 2009, me, my mom, and my stepdad moved into a really old, rustic rural cottage in England. My father had passed away not too long before, and this was going to be a new start for us all. The house was an absolute bargain. It had 6 bedrooms, 2 very spacious living rooms, and a huge annex at the back that was essentially a second house. We couldn't work out why it was so cheap. We went for the viewing, and the family eventually told us that their elderly mother had passed away there peacefully in the annex, and that they just needed to get away from the feeling of her. That probably should have been the first red flag. We weren't put off, and we bought the house. From the start, it was just unsettling. My parents didn't see it at first, but I was incredibly uncomfortable there. It was extremely unnerving and cold, and not to mention, it was isolated behind rows of trees and a very long driveway, so far away from anyone else. It started on the first night. My room was at the end of the corridor, and if you came out of my room, on the right was a bathroom and a locked door that led into the annex, that place where the elderly mother died. My parents slept a long way down the corridor in the last bedrooms, so I was quite isolated, and directly opposite my room were the stairs. This first night, it was freakishly cold. I pulled my blankets up to my head, but after my dad passed away, I had suffered from insomnia for years. So the cold and the anxieties of moving to a new house all added together with this into zero sleep, so I ended up laying awake for hours just sort of staring at the room. My bedroom door was one of those old and mismatched wooden country house doors. It didn't quite reach the carpet, and after a few hours I could hear the creaking of floorboards directly outside my room, and shadows that seemed even darker than the darkness of the hallway walking past my door. I presumed one of my parents had gotten up to use the bathroom at first, but this went on, back and forth, for several minutes, and it was fast, a very brisk walk. And not to mention, next to my door was the locked door to the annex. Anybody walking at that speed would have hit the door, but nothing. It freaked me out and had me dreading the next night. This kept happening every night for a few weeks. I remember one night vividly, I actually left my bedroom door open. Around the same time, I heard the creaking. I turned around and unmistakably, there was a figure, blacker than black, walking forward and backwards in front of the door, just visible in the darkness of the hallway. I couldn't take my eyes off of it the entire time it was there. It's safe to say I never slept with the door open again after that night, but this is where things start to get properly creepy. I'd been terrified of this shadow for weeks now. There was a really horrible feeling I had around it, like it was after me. And one night, as I was going downstairs for dinner, I had the same cold feeling, and for just a second I froze in place in the dark hallway and looked to my right towards the annex door. And there, sure as anything, and without my sleepy eyes to blame it on, I saw the same black shadow walking directly at me at high speed. I ran downstairs as quickly as I could and told my parents everything. They mostly laughed it off and didn't believe me, and tried to reassure me that ghosts aren't real, and there was no chance of anything about this old lady still being in the house. Now, a bit of backstory. This old lady was terrified of the previous owner's family dog, so much so that they installed a pulley system in the house so she could pull a cord from her bedroom that would trigger an old bell to ring in the kitchen if she wanted anything. The whole system was still there when we moved in, and this night, the night after I told my parents, I was awoken around 2:30 in the morning by this bell in the kitchen ringing, loud and on repeat, like it was being pulled firmly and constantly. I ran out into the corridor, and my parents were there too, equally as confused and concerned as I was. We all looked at each other with ever-increasing worry and ran downstairs into the kitchen to see what was going on. As soon as we entered the kitchen, it stopped. We ventured up into the annex to see what could have caused this, but nothing. No sign of anyone, and my God, I hated it there. It was even colder and more lifeless than the main part of the house, and I just felt like I needed to leave as soon as I could. My parents didn't quite believe that this was a ghost yet, but they were clearly less skeptical than before. From here, any activity became much more obvious. We, my parents included, started to hear knocking from the annex door next to my bedroom. Noises from downstairs that sounded like someone was down there moving. Sometimes my fish tank light would flick on and off with an audible click and wake me up. And I would often even wake up to my wardrobe doors being wide open with no breeze in sight. One night, I was sat reading alone in my room, and one of these wardrobe doors opened by itself wide and with relative force. I got up cautiously, closed it, and ran downstairs to see my parents. When I came up around 15 minutes later, every single cupboard door, around a dozen of them, were open as wide as they could go. Lots more went on too. Taps turning themselves on became a particularly regular occurrence, and one night I awoke to the sound of my cupboard door opening again, and saw droplets of water running from the bathroom next to the annex door, all the way to a few feet from my bed, with no droplets out again. I was terrified. It was around 6 months after all of this started that we eventually moved out. My grandma had begun to grow unwell and couldn't care for herself anymore, and she moved in with us. From the beginning, she hated the house. My grandma was so incredibly sweet and calm, and I've never seen her distressed like she was there. And on one night in particular, when I was sat downstairs in the kitchen with her, she took my hand, pointed directly towards the annex, and said, "Don't you go in there. I don't like it in there." It's safe to say that this scared the crap out of me. On the last night we all spent together in that house, I was awoken by my mom screaming. Clear as day, she said she felt 2 hands firmly grab her ankles over the bed sheets and pull her down the bed just a few inches. And right there and then she asked to leave. We went to stay in our old house for a while, but because of the size, my stepdad, the biggest skeptic amongst us, stayed in Lilac Cottage for a few more months. To this day, he's still quiet about that house. He hates talking about it, and he even admits that there was something incredibly wrong there. And without much warning, he put the house up for sale, selling it so desperately that he lost almost a quarter of the price he paid for it, and he's never told us why. I've promised myself that one day I'll reach out to the current owners of that house and see if they have also experienced anything, but I haven't just yet. Have any of you experienced anything like this before?